Titanfall's game mode selections have always played fairly well in my opinion, but I can't shake the feeling that many game modes have never really taken full advantage of Titanfall's sandbox and mobility. Similarly to the map design, I think that Titanfall's game modes often fall into the trap of feeling overly safe and somewhat uninspired. You have your staple modes on offer like Attrition, Capture the Flag, and Hardpoint, but there aren't really any standout modes that are iconic to Titanfall in the same way that the pilots in Titans are. You could probably argue that Attrition is Titanfall's standout mode, but at the end of the day you're still running around and killing things. New game modes aside, I feel that even a few of the standard modes haven't been properly adjusted to make them fit into Titanfall. So in this video, my aim is to offer some ideas on how to rectify both of these issues, starting with some modifications to existing modes. Now, not all of Titanfall 2's game modes suffer from the issue of not being properly adjusted to this sandbox. In fact, some modes have seen notable innovations which I really think improve the experience. The new Stalker and Reaper minions added into Attrition really improve the mode in my opinion, since they're much harder to kill. This places a lot more value on Titans, and victory is often determined by which team can maintain Titan control throughout the match. It adds a layer of strategy to a mode that's fairly simple and easy for players to grasp. The only change I'd make to Attrition would be to make Reapers spawn earlier in the match, but in fewer numbers. Currently, I feel that the match is often almost over by the time that Reapers are dropping onto the field, but when they finally do arrive, they spawn in such high numbers that fighting them can be a real pain. But overall, I like the inclusion of Reapers even though they can be really annoying to fight, simply because Reapers can turn the tide in a Titan fight and give the losing team an opportunity to come back. It's just somewhat irrelevant since by the time Reapers are on the map, the winning team will most likely already have a massive score lead. Another game mode that really takes advantage of Titanfall 2's new mechanics is Last Titan Standing, which I would probably say is the one mode that has seen the most improvement from the original Titanfall. The preset Titan loadouts make each engagement feel different from each other, and the batteries on the map add a new element of map control to the mode. These changes made LTS go from one of my least favorite modes in Titanfall 1 to one of my favorites in Titanfall 2. But unfortunately, not all of the game modes have seen significant improvement like Attrition and LTS. In particular, I would say that Capture the Flag, Amped Hardpoint, and Bounty Hunt all suffer from different issues that really prevent these game modes from reaching their potential. Let's start with CTF. Capture the Flag is one of my favorite game modes in Titanfall given how valuable fast movement is to winning in each match. Sadly, I think that Capture the Flag really suffers from more balance-based issues than any other game mode. The worst offenders of this issue are probably the tactical abilities. To put it plainly, if your team doesn't have enough players using either grapple or stim, you're almost guaranteed to lose. Movement-enhancing tactical abilities are so important for winning CTF matches that the mode heavily discourages using anything else. Sure, AWOL and Pulse Blade can be very useful in certain situations, but I don't think it really compares to the sheer utility of crossing the map within seconds. To solve this problem, I think that using tactical abilities should cause the flag carrier to drop the flag. If using stim and grapple to launch yourself into the enemy base is already ridiculously powerful, then using the same ability to get back to yours is downright unfair. Now, someone brought up an excellent point to my attention. They said that if flag carriers couldn't use their tactical abilities to escape the flag, then the defending team would have an easy time catching up to them by using their tactical abilities. It's a fair point, which is why I think the time it takes to return the flag should be increased. This would give a bit more time for other players to get to where the flag was dropped, as well as creating interesting gameplay opportunities for skirmishes over the flag location. Not being able to transport flags with your abilities would also lead to a few more strategies within the mode. Having a teammate cover you as you make an escape, or transporting flag carriers with your Titan would become much more viable. Speaking of Titans, I feel that restricting the tactical abilities would also lead to much better pilot and Titan interplay, as Titans would feel much more useful within the mode. The saddest thing to see in a game of CTF is when players capture a bunch of flags before the first Titan even drops. And there have been plenty of games where the only time I drop my Titan in is after I've captured 4 flags and want to farm the enemy team for kills. Without being able to use abilities while carrying the flag, Titans would have a much easier time catching up to enemy flag carriers. I also think the rounds would be much longer and end less abruptly, leading to more Titans actually being used in the mode. As it stands right now, I think that Capture the Flag is probably the worst game mode for pub stomping I've ever seen, with some games being over in less than 5 minutes without a single Titan drop. It's a real shame since when you do have a good game of CTF in Titanfall 2, it's easily one of the most fun, fast, and intense modes. The only other change I'd make to Capture the Flag would be to add an overtime feature if the losing team is carrying a flag when the match timer runs out. This would give them one last attempt to tie the match. Now, I also understand that some players really enjoy how CTF plays in Titanfall 2, which is why I think that CTF Nitro should be completely unaffected by these changes and should remain the extremely fast and twitchy experience that players have come to love and appreciate. Amped Hardpoint is another game mode that I feel doesn't mesh too well with Titanfall's sandbox. After the mixtape playlist was removed, I hadn't played a single game of Hardpoint until I needed to record gameplay. One of the mode's biggest issues is where the capture locations are actually placed. On many maps, the hardpoints themselves are placed in small pilot-exclusive areas that Titans can't reach. This really hurts the pilot and Titan interplay in each match, and would often lead to a situation where using your Titan hurts your team rather than helping it. For this reason, I think that at least 2 of the 3 hardpoints should be placed in Titan-accessible locations. I feel this would really help the mode take full advantage of both pilot and Titan gameplay, leading to better interplay and the emergence of more strategies. The other issue I have with the hardpoint is how long it takes to capture an amp. To put it plainly, it isn't very fun to sit still in a game with such great mobility. It just feels somewhat contradictory to what Titanfall is, which often leads me to avoiding the hardpoints altogether. Now I understand that being able to capture hardpoints really quickly may lead to some balancing issues within the mode, which is why I don't think that a flat out decrease to the capture and amp time would really work. Instead, I think adding AI minions back into hardpoint would be a better option. The AI would spawn near a hardpoint that you currently hold, move into it, then proceed to the closest enemy-controlled hardpoint. Upon entering the hardpoint, the minions would begin to slowly capture it unless an enemy is present within the zone. Minions would capture the hardpoint much slower than pilots and Titans, but could help boost how fast you capture it if you keep them alive. For defense, enemy players would need to kill all the minions on the capture point before they can begin taking the hardpoint. This would allow players to help capture objectives without needing to capture it themselves, and players could move around the map taking down enemy minions while trying to cover their own to give their team an edge. As the game progresses, more powerful minions would drop onto the field depending on the score. This would give the losing team an opportunity to mount a comeback as they press into enemy capture points with the help of Stalkers and Reapers. This would also make Titans even more valuable within the mode, as they could kill the minions much faster than pilots. Now, getting the AI to function properly in this mode might be a bit tricky, and this idea could completely backfire if it isn't implemented well. But with proper balancing and map design, I think this could really help Amped Hardpoint mesh better with Titanfall's sandbox, and encourage the hectic, action-packed gameplay that we all love about the franchise. The last game mode that I think needs some changes is Bounty Hunt. I think this mode is really unique and interesting, but once again I don't think that it really fits in Titanfall. The issue with Bounty Hunt is how much value it assigns to each player's life, which I don't think really meshes all that well with Titanfall's aggressive gameplay. I feel that this leads to more players camping and playing very defensively, rather than trying to aggressively take down AI and enemy pilots. I think this is why attrition is still the most played mode, as unlike Bounty Hunt, it really incentivizes and rewards aggressive gameplay rather than camping on rooftops or banking locations. For Titanfall 3, I would love to see Bounty Hunt evolve into a new mode entirely. Each team would spawn on either side of a large map, but wouldn't have access to each other's side right away. Players would clear out a large squad of minions as fast as they could, culminating in the drop of an Auto-Titan. After the first wave is completed, a terminal would open up in each team's base. This is where things get interesting. By default, players would only spawn with an R201 and P2016. From the terminal or spawn screen, players could spend money they earned killing AI to buy upgrades to their loadout, boost cards, or drop a Titan. After completing the first wave, players would gain access to a neutral zone on the map where both teams could fight over a new squad of AI. The faster you clear out the first wave, the faster you'll have access to the neutral zone and the second wave of AI. As the game progresses, the map would open up more and more and new AI squads would drop onto the field for both teams to fight over. Once a team has killed enough AI, they would be declared the winner and the evac phase of the match would begin. This is a relatively simple version of the mode, and I'm sure there are more mechanics that could come into play. I wanted to keep this idea small in scope to make sure that it was fairly digestible and easy to explain, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg of the mode's true potential. If you're interested in PvE and PvP blended game modes, I would recommend looking at Destiny 2's Gambit mode and Halo 5's Warzone mode. I also think that Tony Mo made a video explaining his idea for a similar game mode, which I'll link down in the description. But now I want to switch gears and discuss some entirely new game mode ideas for Titanfall 3. The first thing I considered when trying to come up with a new game mode was how well it would take advantage of Titanfall's mechanics. Many of my quote-unquote new game mode ideas aren't even my idea in the first place, and are inspired by other games. Still, I feel that these game modes would work really well in Titanfall, and may even play better than they do in the game where I first discovered them. This is certainly the case with my first game mode idea, Stockpile. This was a mode that I played back in Halo Reach, but it never really gained much traction. I feel that Halo's slower pace didn't properly complement the objective, which is why I think this mode would be great for Titanfall 3. The way it works is that there are 5 neutral flags around the map that either team needs to collect in order to score points. When a flag has been picked up, you must deliver it to your team's stockpile. However, placing a flag in your stockpile doesn't immediately score points. Instead, you need to wait until the collection timer counts down. When the timer reaches 0, the flags are collected and points are awarded depending on how many were in your stockpile. But here's the catch. Players can run into the enemy stockpile and steal their flags before the timer runs out. I think this mode would work well in Titanfall 3 for a few reasons. The first is that it really emphasizes mobility, and fast movement would be vital for success. The second reason is that the mode would utilize many different areas of each map, making map control a key element for victory. And lastly, I think this game would offer some excellent pilot and Titan interplay, with pilots running around collecting flags while Titans guard the stockpile, escort carriers, and lock down parts of the map. Just thinking about this mode makes me really want to try it out, and of all my game mode suggestions, I think this one will be the most likely to succeed.
That's how you wipe them out.
Another new mode that I thought of is what I call Checkpoint. This is a game mode that I thought up entirely, but I wouldn't be surprised if something similar has already been done before. The way it works is there's a single neutral flag in the center of the map. When the flag is picked up by either team, both teams would see a checkpoint where the flag must be brought to. When a team has transported the flag to the checkpoint, a second checkpoint would appear and the flag must be brought to it as well. When the flag has been transported to the second checkpoint, then the final checkpoint would appear, and once again, the flag must be brought to it. Bringing a flag to a checkpoint doesn't score any points itself. Rather, whichever team brought the flag to 2 of the 3 checkpoints would receive a sum of points. If a team manages to bring the flag to all 3 checkpoints, they will be awarded bonus points. When the flag has been brought to the final checkpoint, the flag resets to a neutral location, and another series of checkpoints would appear on the map. After 5 rounds of flags and checkpoints have passed, the amount of checkpoints required to complete a round would go from 3 to 5. Bonus points would be awarded for bringing the flag to 4 of 5 checkpoints. However, if a team manages to bring a flag through all 5 checkpoints, they will automatically win the game, regardless of how many points either team has. This would ensure that even if one team was far behind their opponents, they would still have a chance to win the match, while at the same time, teams that are significantly better than their opponents will end the game faster and save them some frustration. I think this mode would work well in Titanfall for the same reasons that I think Stockpile would work well. It emphasizes mobility and map control, while placing a lot of value on the use of Titans. The only major concern I have for this mode is how well it would work when one team has total Titan dominance. But really, the same could be said for any other game mode, and if you allow an enemy team to have complete Titan control, you're almost guaranteed to lose regardless of what you're playing. The next game mode idea I have is hardly unique and has been done many times in other games. In fact, I'm almost surprised it hasn't already been included in a Titanfall game. The mode I'm talking about is King of the Hill. It's a relatively straightforward game mode where teams score points by standing within a certain boundary. But as I said when discussing Amped Hardpoint, it's kinda contradictory to include a mode where you need to stand still in a game that has such excellent mobility. For this reason, I think a cool innovation to the standard King of the Hill experience would be if the hill was constantly moving. As soon as the first player enters the hill boundary, the hill will start moving along a set path that players could see on their minimap. The hill would move in and out of open Titan accessible areas and pilot exclusive locations, making both Titan and pilot gameplay vital for winning the match. If players from both teams are present within the hill, no points would be awarded until one team takes control of it. After a certain amount of time, the hill would expire and another one would appear on the map. The objective would then repeat, and the game would go on until one team scores a certain amount of points. It isn't a super complicated concept, and there really isn't much more explaining to do. I personally think that a mobile hill would really spice up what some may consider to be a stale mode, along with both mobility and Titans adding a unique Titanfall spin on an FPS classic. The last core game mode idea I have is, once again, not an original or complex idea. Since I'm terrible at naming things, I simply call this mode Bomb. There have been many different variations of bomb-based game modes in first-person shooters, but the one I think would work best for Titanfall 3 is Neutral Bomb. The way the mode works is both teams have a home base they need to defend. A single bomb would spawn in a neutral location on the map that the two teams need to secure. Players would need to pick up the bomb and arm it in the opposing team's base, then defend the bomb site until the bomb detonates. If the attackers are cleared out, players can move over to where the bomb is planted and defuse it. The bomb could then be picked up from where it was just defused. When players pick up the bomb, they would be marked for all players to see, similar to flag carriers, and capture the flag, and if a bomb carrier uses a tactical ability, they will drop the bomb. Once again, this idea isn't all that complex or difficult to understand. It's a fairly standard game mode that you've probably played in many different games. But at the same time, I don't think a game mode needs to be super complicated or original in order to be fun. Capture the flag isn't a very original idea, but Titanfall's mechanics really complement it regardless. Ultimately, I feel that Neutral Bomb would work in Titanfall for the same reasons that all the other game modes do. It takes advantage of both the pilot's mobility and the Titan's firepower. As much as Titanfall may seem like a more complicated shooter than most, I actually think that it's fairly simple in concept. and I don't mean that as an insult. I feel that too many games these days overcomplicate things more than they need to, and I'd rather play a game that executes a simple concept well than a game that executes complicated mechanics poorly. Now this wraps it up for all my core game mode ideas, but I have some other, more creative ideas as well. So on that note, let's move on to the next topic of this video. Back in my video about general design, I mentioned how I'd love to see a double merit weekend playlist and the return of the weekly rotational playlist. These playlists would contain some more unique game modes or spin on existing modes. After brainstorming for a little while, I've come up with a few ideas for these playlists that I think might be enticing for players to try out. The first game mode I thought of is Juggernaut. This has been done in many other games, but I think that Titanfall could add a unique spin on this mode. The way it works is that at the beginning of the match, one player is selected as a Juggernaut. This player would spawn in a Titan, while all the other players would spawn on dropships. The Juggernaut wouldn't be able to eject from their Titan, and all the other players would need to hunt him down. The player who kills the Juggernaut would become the new Juggernaut, and would immediately respawn in a Titan. From here, all the players would need to hunt the new Juggernaut down. Players would earn points in a few different ways. Killing the Juggernaut would obviously reward you with a sum of points. However, the amount you receive would be determined by how much damage you dealt to the Juggernaut. If you only did 10% of the damage and still the Juggernaut kill, you may only receive 1 point. However, if you dealt 50% of the damage to the Juggernaut, you would receive 5 points. Additional points would also be awarded to players who dealt the most damage to the Juggernaut, and getting kills as the Juggernaut would also award you some points as well. When a player has reached the required amount of points, they would be crowned the victor and the game would end. As for how the Pilot and Titan interplay would work, some additional mechanics may need to be implemented to make the mode play out nicely. For this mode in particular, I could see regenerating Titan shields being necessary to properly balance out Pilot and Titan gameplay. Additionally, core meter gains may also need to be tweaked to ensure that the Juggernaut can actually earn their core before being killed. I think this would be a really cool mode for Titanfall 3 to implement into a double merit weekend playlist, with a massive payout of extra merits being awarded to the player who wins the match. While this game mode isn't entirely original, I think that Titanfall's mobility and Titans would make this game mode feel really unique within the game's sandbox. The next idea I have is a mode that I call Hot Potato, and you could probably guess what this game mode entails. A neutral bomb would spawn at the center of the map that two teams would fight over. When a player picks up the bomb, a 10-second countdown timer would appear on their screen, counting down how long they have until the bomb detonates. However, the timer would pause if the player could maintain a set minimum speed. Once a player picks up the bomb, they would carry it in their hands, making them unable to use any weapons, and would earn their team points for every second that it's held. By pressing the grenade button, players could throw the bomb to their teammates or enemy players, and holding the grenade button would show the bomb's thrown trajectory. When the bomb is on the ground or in the air, the timer would pause until another player picks it up and the timer continues its countdown. By coming in contact with the bomb, players would automatically pick it up without needing to press a button. This is a small but crucial detail, since when the bomb's timer reaches 0, a sum of points is subtracted from the team who is carrying it when it detonates. Smart players could use this to their advantage by waiting until the bomb's timer is low enough to quickly throw it at an enemy, causing the bomb to explode in their enemy's hands. However, this would be a risky play, as if you hold the bomb for too long, you could blow yourself up, and if you threw it to the enemy too early, they might get away with it and score some points, or just throw it right back at you. For balance sake, I think that the bomb shouldn't be throwable for a short duration after picking it up, as this might lead to an endless cycle of players throwing the bomb between two players without the timer counting down. The bomb carrier would drop the bomb if they embarked on their Titan. However, players could ride on friendly Titans, which would pause the timer if they were moving fast enough. This could lead to some really interesting Titan dynamics, where bomb carriers are riding on friendly Titans for extra protection. However, if the Titan is stunned by an arc effect or caught in a tether trap, the timer would start counting down again as the Titan is no longer traveling at an adequate speed. Personally, I think that this game mode would be insanely fun and lead to some really awesome clutch moments. It both takes advantage of pilot mobility, as well as some of the less obvious mechanics of certain Titans. I could see a lot of different Titans being used in the mode for different reasons. Scorch could burn pathways that the carrier may want to use, Ion could laser the carrier out of the air, North Star could lay tethers to trap Titans, Ronin would be excellent for transporting the bomb carrier, and so on. I could easily see this mode being one of my favorites, and would love to play it in a double merit weekend playlist. My next game mode idea is another mode from Halo Reach that didn't really take off. Once again, I feel that the slower nature of Halo's gameplay didn't properly suit the objective of the mode, which is why I think it would work really well in Titanfall 3. This is a pilot's only free-for-all game mode called Headhunter. The way it works is every time a player is killed, an item is dropped which I'll call a bounty. Players must run over to where the enemy died and pick up the bounty, similar to the game mode Kill Confirmed in Call of Duty. However, picking up a player's bounty doesn't immediately award any points. Instead, it increases your own bounty, which needs to be banked at a terminal. As soon as you pick up a player's bounty, a number will appear above your head which indicates what your current bounty is. This number can be seen by all players at all time. The more you kill enemies and steal their bounties, the higher your own bounty becomes, causing players to target you more. Players score points by collecting other players' bounties and banking them at terminals. However, if a player banks the maximum 10 bounties all at once, they will instantly win the game regardless of the current score. While this is an effective strategy for winning, it's also very risky. The safer way to win would be to collect a few bounties and periodically bank them to accumulate the 30 points needed for victory. I personally don't think that Titans would work very well in the mode, which is why I think this should be a pilots only game mode. Overall, I think this would be a really fast-paced, intense, and hectic mode. While I don't think that Headhunter would appeal to everyone, I think there are certain types of players who would really enjoy it as an occasional weekend mode. Another game mode that I think could be pretty interesting is a mode that I call Gauntlet Runner. This is a super simple game mode that's essentially just a parkour race. Think about it like running a few laps of the gauntlet while competing with other players. While this mode is extremely simple, I think there are a lot of interesting things that can be done with it. I remember hearing a while back that Respawn had this idea for an endless runner map where players could practice their movement. Now imagine that same concept but with other players. There would be a death barrier that's constantly chasing you as the course gets harder, and the last player standing wins the game. I think the speedometer that you see in the gauntlet would also be a nice touch for the mode. There really isn't too much more that can be said about it since it isn't exactly a complicated idea. I think this mode would be really appreciated by the types of players who enjoy it, and it would also allow new players to practice their movement against others before they move on to regular multiplayer. Now before I move on to the last topic of this video, I want to quickly go over the weekly rotational playlist. As I stated in my general design video, I would love for this to come back in addition to the Double Merit Weekend playlist. However, I think that the weekly rotational playlist should be an actual playlist rather than just a single mode. While there are some pretty standard modes like attrition that most people enjoy, I think there are segments of the community that have more specific preferences, like the players who only enjoy pilot gameplay for example. These players often don't get as much variety as others, and I think the weekly rotational playlist should cater to them. I don't think that adding a massive amount of game modes to mixtape matchmaking would really work, as I feel that might dilute the player base a bit too much. Instead, these game modes could be combined to form their own playlists which rotate with each other week after week. As for what these playlists could be, I have a few ideas that I've thought of. I've already mentioned a Pilots Only playlist which features various different game modes. This playlist could contain Pilots vs. Pilots, Hardpoint, Capture the Flag, and Marked for Death, but without any Titans. I think a similar playlist could exist for players who only like Titan gameplay. This playlist could contain Titan Brawl, Hardpoint, Marked for Death, and Last Titan Standing, but without any pilots. Titan Only Hardpoint is a game mode that I would really like to try out personally. Another really cool and unique playlist would be Multi-Team. This playlist would feature Pilots vs. Pilots, Titan Brawl, Last Titan Standing, and Skirmish, but with 4 teams of 2 players. I know that me and one of my friends would be in that playlist all week long if it was available. If Respawn were to include a map editor, then another cool playlist would be a Community Spotlight. This playlist could feature some of the best community-made maps with a variety of different modes. Map makers would absolutely love this playlist, and getting a map into it would be a personal goal for many of them. And lastly, a competitive playlist with modified game rules tailored specifically to the competitive community would be a great one to have as well. I'm not really a part of the competitive Titanfall community, so I can't comment on which changes would need to be made, but I'm sure there are some community members that Respawn could contact to find out what competitive players want. Now of course it would be awesome if all of these different game modes were always available, but I think that would split the player base way too much to actually work. I personally think that this is the next best thing, and while it isn't perfect, it's better than nothing. If you guys have any ideas on some other playlists or other game modes, feel free to leave a comment explaining how it works. I'm sure the Titanfall community has some excellent ideas, and I would love to hear about them. Now before I end this video, I have one more game mode suggestion to make. This mode is much larger in scope than any of my other ideas, so it really warrants its own section of this video.
Graves to all personnel. Demeter is the gateway to the frontier. By attacking our largest refueling depot, the militia thinks they can shut the door on us. You will correct that perspective. Graves out.
When the original Titanfall first launched, one of its biggest criticisms was its multiplayer campaign. Now, I've always assumed the decision to make a multiplayer campaign instead of a single-player campaign came down to either budget or time constraints. After all, Respawn Entertainment was only founded 4 years before the release of Titanfall 1, and building a team while making a game probably had a fairly significant impact on development. While I would probably agree that a multiplayer campaign isn't an ideal replacement, I do actually think that the original Titanfall's campaign mode was a worthwhile addition. The story itself wasn't actually that bad in concept, it was the storytelling where the game faltered. But while the story didn't grip me, I think the multiplayer campaign still had the positive side effect of giving context for multiplayer matches. For a game which features soldiers who can run on walls, jump in midair, and then pilot a massive mech, I actually found Titanfall 1's multiplayer to be surprisingly immersive. Each match felt like part of a massive war, and this is one aspect that Titanfall 2 kinda dropped the ball on. Not that it really matters to most players, since I doubt there are many people who actually value immersion in a multiplayer experience. While I can't say that I really want the multiplayer campaign to return for Titanfall 3, what I will say is that I love the idea of a lore-inspired multiplayer game mode with light story elements. Something like Operations in Battlefield 1 or Galactic Conquest in the original Star Wars Battlefront 2. The way it would work would be similar to the multiplayer campaign in concept, but without the overarching story. There would be a set of missions which all have their own objective that contribute to the overall war. Things like taking control over a refueling base or destroying an enemy production facility. You would play as either the militia or IMC, and each match would begin with an immersive intro where faction leaders would explain the objective, similar to the mission openings in Titanfall 1's campaign. Once you land on the ground, the match would begin. So how would this mode work? Well, my first idea was a linear objective-based game mode like Rush in Battlefield. But I honestly don't think that an asymmetric game mode would work well in Titanfall, and I think Titanfall's mobility lends itself more towards a tug-of-war style of gameplay. Once the match begins, players and AI forces would start fighting over a neutral objective, something like capturing a hardpoint or eliminating a certain amount of enemies. When one team completes the neutral objective, they would be tasked with completing a secondary objective. The losing team would need to defend their secondary objective while trying to retake the neutral objective. If the losing team completes the neutral objective before the winning team completes the secondary objective, the tables would turn and they would be attacking their enemy's secondary objective. When a team completes a secondary objective, they would then be tasked with completing a final objective. The losing team would need to defend the final objective while attempting to retake their secondary objective. If the winning team completes the final objective, they would win the match. However, if the losing team retakes their secondary objective, then the match continues. The winning team would need to retake the secondary objective, while the losing team would need to complete the neutral objective to gain the upper hand. It probably seems a lot more complicated than it actually is, and for the most part it's really just tug of war. As the winning team takes objectives, the losing team's pilot, Titan, and AI spawns would move, and the AI compositions would change, causing the losing team to spawn closer to their objectives with more powerful AI forces. When the winning team takes the neutral objective, the losing team would spawn slightly closer to their secondary objective than the winning team, and would receive squads of stalkers to assist them. Similarly, if the winning team takes the secondary objective, the losing team would spawn drastically closer to their final objective than the winning team, and would receive squads of Reapers. This would give the losing team some breathing room to mount a comeback, while the winning team would need to maintain their momentum. As for what these objectives could be, I have a few ideas. For neutral and secondary objectives, I think capture Hardpoint, eliminate enemy forces, and initiate hack are 3 pretty decent options. In Hardpoint, there would be a neutral hardpoint that either team needs to capture and amp. AI minions would also rush and slowly capture the hardpoint for each respective team. Players would need to clear out the opposing team's AI in order to begin capturing it. AI would also capture the objective much slower than pilots and titans, so players would need to play the objective if they want to capture the hardpoint efficiently. If your objective was eliminate enemy forces, then you would simply need to kill a certain amount of pilots, titans, and minions before the enemy team does. It's pretty much a small match of attrition. And if your objective is initiate hack, players would need to secure a data terminal and use their data knife on it. This would start a timer, and when it reaches 0, the team that initiated the hack would secure the objective. But while the timer is counting down, the opposing team could use their data knives to convert the terminal and reset the timer. However, capturing the terminal with your data knife would take some time, and if enemy pilots, titans, or AI damage you while you're hacking the terminal conversion would be interrupted. Teammates would need to cover the pilot who's hacking the terminal to ensure this doesn't happen. For final objectives, I think plant bomb, destroy core, or extract enemy intel could be pretty interesting. Plant bomb is fairly straightforward. The winning team would need to bring a bomb into a specific area of the enemy team's base, and then hold a button to start arming it. However, this would take a long time, and if you took damage from enemy pilots, titans, or minions, the bomb plant would be interrupted. This would cause the bomb to be dropped on the ground, and players would need to clear out the enemies before they could pick the bomb back up and continue arming it. However, if the losing team kills the bomb carrier, they could pick up the bomb and hold a button to disarm it. If you are disarming a bomb and you take damage from enemy forces, the disarm would be interrupted and the bomb would be dropped. If the losing team fully disarms the bomb, then another bomb would spawn and the winning team would have to arm it all over again. Once the bomb has been fully armed by the winning team, it could not be defused and the evac phase would begin. If Destroy Core was the final objective, players would need to rush in and deal damage to a large core. This core could take a lot of damage, so Titans and Grenadier weapons would be ideal. The other team would simply need to prevent the core from being destroyed. It isn't a complicated idea, and it wouldn't work if Nuclear Eject was in the game, which further cements my opinion that Nuclear Eject has an overall negative impact on potential new additions to the sandbox. However, if there was a nuke-based Titan whose core ability was a buffed version of Nuclear Eject, that could lead to some pretty interesting strategies for this objective. And lastly, if Extract Intel was the final objective, players would need to rush into the enemy base and hack a terminal. This would be the exact same as the Initiate Hack neutral or secondary objective, with one major change. After the hack was complete, players would need to extract a data drive. This would basically turn the game into Capture the Flag. The winning team would need to take the data drive to a specific location, while the losing team would need to stop the carrier and destroy the drive. When the drive is destroyed, the winning team would need to reinitiate the hack to create a new one. Now ideally, each map would have its own final objective, but that probably isn't actually feasible. If you guys can think of another 6 final objectives, I would love to hear your ideas down in the comments section. Another interesting idea would be if the neutral and secondary objectives were randomized rather than preset on each map, making each match a bit more unique and less predictable. I also think that faction leaders should inform players of their objective progress in an immersive way. So instead of faction leaders saying, take that hardpoint, they would say something like, get the AA gun online. The AA gun being the reason that the player is taking the hardpoint in the first place. It's a small detail, but it's one I appreciate nonetheless. Now with this being a tug-of-war style game mode, some people may note that the match may never end. This is why it's important to note that each match would have a 20-minute timer. This is where the different victory and loss states come into play. If a team wins by completing the final objective, they will receive a full win and the other team will receive a full loss. If at the end of the 20 minutes, one team is holding their enemy's secondary objective, they will receive a partial win, while the other team will receive a partial loss. And if at the end of the 20 minutes, one team is holding the neutral objective, they will receive a bare win and the other team will receive a bare loss. So why does any of this matter? After all, a win is a win, right? Well, not exactly. The win and loss state plays into the second part of the Ground War game mode. Winning a match is only one battle in the entire war. The Ground War game mode isn't just a single match, but a non-linear series of missions that players can take part in. I think it's about time that I introduce the Frontier map. Alright, I know it isn't all that impressive, but my skills in MS Paint are rather limited. You'll just have to imagine that there's a galaxy in the background. Each one of these circles represents a multiplayer match, with the center circle being the very first. The winners of that match will be able to vote on the next location where they'll fight, out of all the locations that are connected to the circles they occupy. Not only does this allow players to vote on the next map they'll fight on, but different locations are worth different amounts of war assets. Above each circle, you'll see the amount of war assets that a team can earn for a full, partial, and bare victory. But below each circle, you'll see the amount of war assets that a team can lose for a full loss, partial loss, and bare loss. Take note that the losing team will always lose twice the amount of war assets that the winning team gains. This ensures that the war will eventually come to an end, as at the end of each match, more overall assets are lost than gained. By default, both the IMC and Militia factions start with 500 war assets each. As they fight each other over the course of various matches, either faction will gain or lose war assets until one of the factions reaches 0. When a faction runs out of war assets, they will lose the war, concluding the game mode. The winning team will receive a large amount of credits, while the losing team will receive less. However, there is one other way to win. On either side of the Frontier map are each faction's home base. If one faction holds the center circle along with the 3 circles closest to the enemy home base, they can choose to assault it. This would be a risky move, since if the enemy wins the match, they will receive 250 war assets and you will lose 500. As it's the enemy's home base, they would automatically control all of the objectives on the map except your team's final objective, meaning that you would start in a losing state. You would need a full victory in order to win the match, meaning that you would need to take all of the objectives. Anything less, and you lose. Assaulting an enemy home base would be the ultimate test of skill, and would reward players with a massive amount of credits if they could pull it off. To match the scale and intensity of the match, Home-based maps should be specifically designed for the ground war game mode exclusively, and have a really spectacular opening cinematic for both teams. Something like Titanfall 1's Battle for Demeter. I also think it's important not to forget about all the little details that made Titanfall 1's multiplayer so immersive. Things like the fleet fighting up in the sky, the chatter between grunts, the turrets that you can capture, the wildlife on the maps, and so much more. Maybe it's just nostalgia, but I really miss this element of Titanfall, and it was probably the most disappointing part of Titanfall 2. Sure, these are really small details that most people don't really care about, but there are certainly some people in the community that really appreciated this too. Now, do I think that a game mode of this size and scale would be included at the launch of Titanfall 3? Probably not, and honestly, for the launch day product, I wouldn't make it a priority. However, this game mode seems like it would be excellent for a DLC drop down the line, maybe on the 1-year anniversary of launch. I could imagine seeing a trailer for a mode like this at E3 and getting super pumped to play it. It seems like something that could bring a lot of players back to the game after they haven't logged on for a while, and if some new cosmetic microtransactions came along with it, then I could see myself and others dropping some money on them. But maybe this is all just my opinion and nobody would really care for a mode like this. While I personally would really love it, you guys will have to let me know what you think down in the comments section. And that brings me to the end of this episode. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns about anything I said in this video, please feel free to ask. Don't be afraid to leave your own game mode ideas, as I would love to hear some other opinions as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video where I'll discuss progression and post-launch content.
Pilot, this is McAllen.
False destination.
If you're still on the ground out there, it's been an honor serving with you.
1.
On the frontier today, the IMC's port of Demeter was attacked by militia insurgents. Reports are sketchy, but indications are that the refueling facilities sustained